I like it because I know one thing for certain is that if you do get married, you must commit yourself to that.
He never married, never had children, and yet he filled stadiums with love song. He sold over 250 million records. He outlasted the Beatles, Elvis, and 5 decades of British pop. But behind the glitter and fame, he carried a heartbreak that never healed, and a scandal that nearly destroyed him. This is not just the story of a pop icon. This is the story of survival. Born Harry Roger Webb on October 14, 1940, in Lucknow, British India, Cliff Richard entered a world gripped by chaos. Outside the hospital walls, World War II cast a long shadow over the British Empire, and inside India, the fires of independence burned brighter with every passing day. Demonstrations, arrests, and tension filled the street. The Indian National Congress had launched the Quit India movement just 2 years earlier, and the cry for freedom echoed in every alley. By 1946, the country was a tinderbox. Direct Action Day in Calcutta triggered deadly riots that spread across the subcontinent, claiming thousands of lives. For families like the Webbs, British colonials once living in privilege, life had turned dangerously unpredictable. Their world was unraveling, British rule was collapsing, and resentment toward colonial residents was no longer hidden. The streets they had once strolled were now marked by curfews and gunfire. Faced with growing hostility and fearing for their safety, the Webb family made a desperate decision. They had to leave India, but they didn't leave in luxury. They boarded a crowded steamship, the SS Ranchi, joining a wave of anxious expatriates. For 3 long weeks, they crossed the Indian Ocean, squeezed in among hundreds of other British families, abandoning everything they had ever known. What waited on the other side wasn't home. It was post-war England, gray, cold, and broken. Food was rationed. Housing was scarce. The days of palm trees and servants were gone. But that journey, marked by loss and upheaval, left a mark on young Harry. It planted something in him, quiet but fierce determination to carve out a future on his own terms. And soon, that boy would become something far bigger than anyone expected. They crossed the Indian Ocean on a crowded, sweltering ship called the SS Ranchi, trading heat and palm trees for gray skies and ration books. They landed in post-war England, a family that had once lived in sunshine, now shoved into a cold, cramped house in Surrey. Gone were the servants and the silence of colonial privilege. In its place, struggle. But that struggle did something to Harry. It carved out ambition, a hunger. He didn't just want to survive in this new world. He wanted to make something of himself. And so, Harry Webb disappeared. The talent manager looked him dead in the eye and said, "You need a name that sounds like rock." Cliff, he offered. Solid, British, like a cliff face. Then came Richard, a nod to Little Richard, the wild American rocker. And with that, Cliff Richard was born. In 1958, at just 18 years old, Cliff Richard exploded onto the scene with a song that would shake the very foundations of British music. Move. It wasn't just a catchy tune. It was a declaration of war against the bland, overproduced music dominating UK airwaves. Up until that point, British charts were filled with crooners in suits, singing orchestral ballads meant to soothe, not stir. The youth were restless, hungry for something real, something raw. And then came Move It, with its sharp guitar riffs, driving rhythm, and Cliff's unmistakable swagger. The song was pure rebellion, a British rock and roll anthem that didn't feel borrowed from America, but born on the grey streets of post-war London. The BBC almost didn't play it at first, claiming it was too aggressive. But when it finally hit the airwaves, it hit like lightning. Teens gathered around radios, shocked and thrilled to hear a voice that sounded like them. The impact was immediate. The single shot to number 2 on the UK charts, launching Cliff and British rock music into the spotlight. It was a cultural reset. Move. It was the first truly authentic British rock record. Even John Lennon famously said, "Before Cliff and Move It, there was nothing worth listening to in England." Girls screamed. Boys copied his style. Parents were confused. That was the point. Cliff Richard had arrived, and he brought with him a new sound, a new attitude, and a new era. British rock wasn't just about to take off. It had just found its first real star. Cliff Mania hit the UK like a lightning bolt. Loud, sudden, and impossible to contain. By 1959, Cliff Richard was no longer just an exciting new voice. He was a full-blown national sensation. His breakthrough Single Living Doll, track he initially hated for being too soft, too sugary, turned out to be a monster hit. climbing to #1 and staying there for 6 straight weeks. It sold 770,000 copies, a staggering number at the time, and became Britain's best-selling single of the year. His follow-up, Travel in Light, continued the momentum. Another chart topper that proved Cliff's versatility wasn't a fluke. Unlike many teenage idols who faded after one hit, Cliff kept climbing. He was no longer just making noise, he was making history. And Hollywood noticed. That same year, he made his acting debut in the powerful drama Serious Charge, a film that tackled bold themes like false accusations, sexual repression, and morality, subjects that were nearly taboo for a pop idol to engage with. Cliff was just 19. He was already shattering expectations. He wasn't content being a pretty face with a guitar. He wanted to act. He wanted to grow. And he wasn't afraid to take risks. Then came Espresso Bongo in 1960, a satirical take on the sleazy underbelly of the music industry. It was sharp, stylish, and self-aware. Once again, Cliff proved he could do more than sing love songs. He could reflect and even critique the very system that made him a star. By now, it wasn't just about the music. Cliff Richard was becoming a brand, a symbol of British youth culture. His look, his voice, his moves, everything about him was fresh, original, electrifying. Girls plastered their bedroom walls with his photos. Boys tried to copy his slick quiff and swagger, magazine covers, radio countdown, stadiums full of screaming fans. This wasn't fame, it was frenzy. While Elvis Presley ruled America, Cliff had done something no one thought possible. He'd created a British version of rock stardom, but more importantly, he wasn't a copycat. He was evolving, adapting, and redefining what a British pop icon could be. The boy from India had become the face of a revolution, and he was just getting started. In 1963, Summer Holiday hit theaters. Fans mobbed Leicester Square so wildly, Cliff couldn't even exit his car. The soundtrack hit #1 before the film even released. He was bigger than big. But then came the Beatles. Most thought Cliff would vanish, another victim of Beatlemania. Instead, in 1964, Cliff Richard released 6 top 10 hits. The Beatles managed 5. Paul McCartney admitted it. They went to Hamburg because Cliff already had Britain sewn up. Cliff wasn't just competing, he was winning. In 1965, at the peak of his powers, Cliff Richard reached a milestone no one expected from a boy who once shared a bedroom with his sisters in post-war Surrey. Fans across the globe voted him the world's top male singer, beating out legends like Elvis Presley and John Lennon. The Beatles were storming America. Elvis was still packing out stadiums, but Cliff, he was holding his ground and winning. He wasn't a passing trend. He was a fixture, a cornerstone of British music. Just a year later, in 1966, Cliff shocked the entertainment world in a way that no chart position or award ever could. On stage at London's Earl's Court, in front of thousands, and beside world-famous evangelist Billy Graham, Cliff Richard publicly declared that he had become a Christian. This wasn't a quiet interview quote. This was a live, televised moment, a bold, emotional testimony that stunned fans and critics alike. In an era defined by free love, psychedelics, rebellion, and rock and roll excess, Cliff's decision to openly speak about faith, morality, and God was nothing short of radical. For a rock star to align himself with religion was almost unthinkable. Pop icons were meant to rebel, not repent. But Cliff wasn't chasing rebellion. He was chasing truth. Behind the scenes, his spiritual journey had started 2 years earlier, quietly, away from cameras and crowds. But in 1966, he brought it to the world stage, not as a PR stunt, but as an act of honesty. Some fans felt betrayed. Some walked away. Industry insiders whispered that his career was over. But Cliff didn't blink, because in that moment he wasn't just performing. He was revealing his soul and rewriting the rules of what a rock star could be. It wasn't just a quiet confession. It was a collision with faith, identity, and public perception. In the heart of the swinging 60s, when rebellion was cool and God was out, Cliff took a different path. Some fans wept, others just walked away. Rumors swirled. Was he quitting music? Would he become a preacher? He thought about it, but Cliff didn't run. He stayed. And in doing so, he redefined the pop star. He became the first British music icon to blend chart-topping success with open Christian belief. It wasn't a gimmick. It was real. He said, "I didn't find religion. I found a person, Jesus." But by the mid-70s, Cliff's chart presence faded. Then came Devil Woman, a hard-edged, dark song about psychics and curses. It hit #1, 6 in America. His first U.S. top 10. Even rock gods like Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton wore "I'm Nearly Famous" badges. The man once dismissed as safe was now thrilling critic. One review compared his album to Marvin Gaye's best work. By the late 1980s, many of Cliff Richard's peers had faded into nostalgia acts or quietly exited the spotlight. Cliff, he was just getting warmed up. In 1987, nearly 30 years into his career, he released the album Always Guaranteed, a sleek, modern pop record that avoided the overproduced cliches of the era. Teaming up again with producer Alan Tarney, Cliff found his sonic sweet spot. The album wasn't just a commercial success. It went platinum, proving that he could evolve without losing his essence. Then came Christmas, 1988, and Cliff did what few pop stars ever managed. He created a new holiday classic. Mistletoe and Wine was soft, spiritual, and steeped in warmth. It was released in November, but became the undisputed Christmas #1, holding the top spot for 4 straight weeks, selling over 750,000 copies in just 6 weeks. It outsold everyone, U2, Phil Collins, Kylie Minogue, and became the biggest-selling UK single of the year. Decades later, it would continue to earn him 6 figures annually in royalties. Cliff had become not just a pop star, but a seasonal tradition. And then came the crown jewel, his 100th single, released in 1989, a milestone no other British artist had reached. To celebrate, Cliff invited 2,000 fans to the London Palladium and let them vote on which song he'd release. The runner-up, The Best of Me, went on to hit #1, 2 on the charts, and earned silver certification. That same year, he took over Wembley Stadium for a massive concert dubbed The Event, a nostalgic, electric celebration of a career still very much alive. The industry recognized what the public had long known. Cliff Richard wasn't just a legend, he was a force. He received the prestigious Bright Award for outstanding contribution to music, sealing his place in British cultural history. By the time he sang Saviour's Day in 1990, he had #1 hits in 5 decades, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90. But success came at a cost. Cliff never married, never had children. In his 2020 memoir, he finally admitted the truth. He had fallen deeply in love with Olivia Newton-John. They met in the 70s. Their chemistry on stage was electric, but behind the scenes, Cliff was quietly in love. She was engaged to Bruce Welch, Cliff's bandmate, his best friend. The heartbreak? Unspeakable. Cliff never acted on it. Olivia never left Bruce for him, and even when she finally walked away from Bruce, it was too late. But Cliff kept her in his life for over 50 years, through duets, tours, laughter, grief. When she died in 2022, after a 30-year battle with cancer, Cliff said she had simply stopped living. It was his way of coping. And then came 2014. At age 77, while relaxing in Portugal, Cliff turned on the TV and saw his own home surrounded by helicopters. Police were raiding his Berkshire estate. Live, on camera, the BBC had made a secret deal with police. They called it internally the money shot. It was an ambush, an attack. Cliff collapsed to the floor, sobbing. He thought they were burglars. The accusation? One man said Cliff had assaulted him 30 years earlier during a Billy Graham rally, but the room he described didn't exist. The officers who stood by Cliff that night never even interviewed. For 22 months, police investigated. Cliff was never arrested, never charged, but he was broken. He lost weight, developed shingles, couldn't sleep. He stopped singing. Even his voice, the one constant in his life, went quiet. His home, once a sanctuary, now felt violated and contaminated. He described the feeling as if the walls themselves had turned against him. Every drawer opened by strangers, every photo taken by intrusive lenses, left behind a lingering sense of betrayal. And the most grotesque part, the BBC, who had coordinated with police to film the live raid on his home, later submitted that footage for a journalism award. They called it the money shot in internal memos. While Cliff sat at home, humiliated and in shock, the network packaged his personal tragedy into an awards pitch, as if destroying a man's life was worthy of applause. But Cliff didn't stay silent. He sued, not out of vengeance, but out of a desperate need to reclaim his name. In 2018, the High Court ruled in his favor. The judge condemned the BBC's conduct as sensationalist, unlawful, and arrogant. Cliff was awarded over $400,000 in damages, but no sum could undo what had been taken: his privacy, his peace, his sense of trust. What hurt the most was the lingering cloud. Even after being cleared, he said, people will always wonder. That suspicion, that permanent stain, was the real punishment. He didn't want money. He wanted truth. He wanted the record to show. There was no evidence, not even a shred. What happened to Cliff Richard wasn't just a media scandal. It was a modern-day crucifixion, played out in headlines and survived only through courage, resilience, and an unbreakable will to rise again. But even after the headlines, the lawsuits, and the tears, Cliff stood up again. In 2020, at 80 years old, Cliff released Music, the Air That I Breathe. His voice still soaring. He was no longer just a singer. He was a survivor, a cultural anchor in a world that had long since lost its way. He had endured fame, heartbreak, and humiliation. He had fallen, but never stayed down. He didn't self-destruct. He didn't surrender to bitterness. He kept going. From Move It to Millennium Prayer, from Olivia to Wembley, from raids to redemption. Cliff Richard's life reads like fiction, but every word is true. He changed British music forever, opening the floodgates for the Beatles, the Stones, and generations of artists who followed. Without Cliff Richard, there would be no British invasion. He didn't just set the stage, he built it. He challenged the industry, not just with sound, but with soul. When record labels wanted formula, he gave them faith. When the media turned on him, he stood his ground. When the BBC treated his trauma as television fodder, he fought back, not with rage, but with resolve. He took them to court, and he won, not just for himself, but for every public figure wrongfully vilified without evidence. That ruling reshaped UK media law. Cliff didn't just survive the scandal, he changed the system. He sang through sorrow, from unrequited love to the unbearable loss of Olivia Newton-John. He stood beside her through decades of friendship, only to lose her to cancer in 2022. Even in grief, he honored her the only way he knew how, through music. He smiled through silence, carrying decades of whispers about his private life with dignity, never lashing out, never breaking character. The world speculated. Cliff kept singing, and if you're still wondering whatever happened to Cliff Richard, he's still here, still recording, still touring, still giving, because icons don't fade. They endure through heartbreak, through headlines, through history. Cliff Richard isn't just part of the past. He's proof that with resilience, integrity, and a voice that refuses to go quiet, you can outlast the noise.